Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Now, the mood across world markets was dampened today. Of course, investors are worrying about inflation ahead of U.S. consumer price data expected later today. Now, most emerging market stocks moved little on the day. We saw MSCI's emerging market index adding just 0.4% on the back of fears over widespread defaults in the property sector, as we see assets linked to China's property sector continuing to tumble today. South Africa's JSE All Shares seemingly took a breather after a strong run in the past 5 sessions, which of course was fueled by the precious metals and mining index. Today saw a slight climb in industrials. The index was up 0.19% on the day. Now, also coming up on the show, mixed reactions in Kenya and Somalia following the International Court of Justice maritime border decision. Canada's Barrick Gold discovers more deposits at its Kibali mining venture in the DRC. And Egypt's first smartphone maker to assemble handsets for the rest of the continent. Now, a ruling by the International Court of Justice over a sea border dispute between Kenya and Somalia has sparked mixed reactions in the two East African nations. Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta rejected the court's decision to hand Somalia control of most of a potentially oil and gas-rich area in the Indian Ocean. Now, for the citizens of Somalia, however, it was a time to celebrate. ICJ judges unanimously ruled that there was no pre-existing agreement on that maritime boundary, as Kenya had claimed in its argument.
The maritime border dispute has strained the relationship between Somalia and Kenya since 2014. That's when Mogadishu filed the case at the UN's top court. And Tuesday's verdict has not eased the stalemate.
While Kenya is not surprised by the decision, it is profoundly concerned by the import of the decision and its implications for the Horn of Africa region and international law generally. At the very onset, Kenya wishes to indicate that it rejects in totality and does not recognize the findings in the decision. This decision is, in the circumstances, a zero-sum game, which will only strain the relations between our two countries. It will also reverse the social, political, and economic gains and potentially aggravate the peace and security situation in the fragile Horn of Africa region.
His Somalia counterpart, President Mohamed Abdullahi Mohamed, however, sees the ruling as an opportunity to strengthen ties between the two countries.
By respecting the laws and the international conventions of the world, the Somalia federal government clearly states that it abides by the decisions of the court, and we expect the neighboring country, Kenya, to respect the international rule of law and forget its ambition that is based on misleading.
Somali citizens are also happy with the outcome.
It's a big happy day for all Somali people after ICJ verdict on the Somalia-Kenya maritime dispute. The case was in court for the past 7 years. However, it's historical victory for all of us.
We should not celebrate because it's our territorial waters and we should possess it.
The ICJ's judgment is final and cannot be appealed, but the court has no means of enforcing its rulings. And with Kenya refusing to recognize its authority, it's a matter of what next. Chao Muhono, CGTN.
Well, as Kenya rejects that decision, let's delve into what's next. We're getting the latest with Njoki Mboshe. She's a maritime and governance scholar. She's also an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. Great to have you with us on the show today, Njoki. Now, of course, Kenya's president pretty much said the country rejects the court's decision in totality and does not recognize those findings. And of course, we know rulings at the ICJ are final, but from time to time, countries have ignored them in the past. So given all this, How can the ruling be enforced? What do you think will happen next?
Well, thank you very much for having me tonight. Apologies for my hoarse voice. I'm having a cough and some sore throat, so sorry for that. Getting back to your question, as you have indicated, it is not unusual for countries to reject ICJ decisions or the decisions by the International Court of Justice, and for various reasons. Kenya has given her own reasons, which it did from the beginning, and one of those reasons being really the fact that it is for us to explore out of court engagements. And this is something that has been going on for a long time, even going back to the 2009 Memorandum of Understanding between Kenya and Somalia. So really, it is not unusual for countries to say, no, we will not be bound by this particular process. We will not be bound by this decision. We have seen quite recently, I think in 2016, where the dispute with respect to the South China Sea came up, and quite recently the ICJ did deliver its judgment on that. And China said, no, we are not going to abide by this. Way back before that, we have also seen even the US itself saying, no, we are not going to be bound by this particular decision. And that one in particular was a decision with respect to a dispute between the United States and Nicaragua. So Kenya saying that it will not be bound by the decision of the ICJ is not unprecedented. It has happened before, and therefore it is not unusual. The question is then, what is the best way forward, as you have asked? Again, even the statute itself, the ICJ statute, encourages, as well as the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which is really the maritime constitution, encourage for states to determine matters of boundary disagreements in a peaceful manner. So really, even though there is a judgment by the ICJ, nothing prevents the countries from still coming together and coming up with a workable plan. And when I say a workable plan, just to share with our viewers that there are indeed countries that have what we call development and cooperation agreements, where, for instance, they have contested areas. And I'd like for us to perhaps consider an example of this being Mauritius and Seychelles. And there are indeed many other examples, but to say is one way forward.
Sorry to interrupt you there, because I just wanted to say that Kenya actually mentioned that it did want to resolve this dispute diplomatically through institutions such as the African Union. What about that? Is there precedent to solving disputes like that and go on with the options on the table?
Yes, again, going through the AU or the African Union route is also not unusual. The African Union has a body called the African Union Border Program, which really is intended to help African Union state parties, which are 50 out of 55 parties, states of Africa are members to this particular, to the African Union. So really we're looking at 50 states in Africa saying that, they're part of the African Union, and therefore they would therefore be able to call upon the assistance of resolving maritime boundary issues through the African Union Border Program. It has assisted many countries before. In fact, we had a deadline that was recently extended to, I believe, 2021 or 2022, which was really to help African countries so that then we can be able to agree on how we are going to relate on these border issues. Remember, again, even when you go back to looking at for the African map, where really is the, is the African map? We are dealing with colonial boundaries, and therefore it is not useful for any country, Somalia, Kenya, or any other country for that matter, to want to impose a certain position.
Right.
If we were to go the route of any country wanting to impose, you would be surprised at the number of problems we would have. Remember, again, out of the around 55 African states, depending on which number you want to acknowledge, remember we have around 38 of these African states that
Right.
are coastal states. So if you were to say that people are going to just come and impose their intention of these boundaries, then you could clearly see a potential very dangerous implication.
Well, we'll certainly continue to watch that situation closely and how it'll impact relations between the two nations as well. We do have to leave it there. And Njoki, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. That, of course, is Njoki Mboshe. She's a maritime and governance scholar, as well as an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. Well, let's move on now to the Democratic Republic of Congo, where Canada's Barrick Gold has discovered geological extensions at its Kibali gold mining joint venture. This will prolong the life of the mine to 2040 now. Here's CGTN's Beryl Oro with more on that story.
The mine in the country's northeast is on track to produce gold at the top of forecasts for the year, and geologists have found mineral reserves exceeding those depleted annually.
We know what those blocks of rock are going to deliver, and we'll really be able to deliver against our plan. That's the 10-year plan. Now that's made of reserves, so it's the sort of confidence of that estimate. Past that, we call them resources in their different categories.
A new central bank governor and legislature broadly supportive of President Felix Tshisekedi should aid the release of $500 million cash left over after Kibali repatriated 60% of its revenue and paid in country expenses. We put in, $3.7 billion initially, and we've continued to invest. And we've got to start paying it down. As soon as we've paid it down, so we've agreed we'll start paying dividends and the loan down together. Kibali, 45% owned by Barrick, 45% by Anglo Gold Ashanti, and 10% by state-owned gold company Sokimo, aims to double its 10-megawatt battery bank to help boost power from its 3 hydroelectric dams and reduce reliance on its diesel thermal power station during the dry season. The hydro power station feeds the battery, and then when the big engine pulls the power, it pulls it from the battery, and you're always feeding the battery. So what we've learned now, we want to put another battery in. We get better bang for our buck by introducing more batteries at this stage rather than expanding the base load. But it's a world-leading concept, this, and it's working really well. Bristow, who wants to add more copper assets to Barrick's portfolio, also said he was looking at opportunities in Congo's copper belt in the south. We will invest in copper opportunities where we have a competitive advantage over the traditional copper miners. And our viewers in DRC, we have that. And so, we've been certainly looking at the copper regions, the Central African copper belt. The company is working with the government to create an exclusion zone on its concession where artisanal mining would be authorized, and will help identify gold deposits for mining by local communities who have been working inside the protected Garamba National Park. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
And now look at our corporate headlines today. A company called Vantage Data Centers is set to invest more than $1 billion in its first African campus in Johannesburg. Now, the expansion underlines the rising demand for cloud services in relatively underdeveloped economies. This will include 60,000 square meters of data space across 3 facilities in Johannesburg once fully developed. Now, the first phase of the campus is slated for completion by the 3rd quarter of 2022. Meanwhile, American tech giant Apple is likely to slash production of its iPhone 13 by as many as 10 million units, owing to the global chip shortages. The firm was expected to produce 90 million units of the new iPhone models by the end of this year. And German automaker Volkswagen is considering cutting up to 30,000 jobs in a bid to reduce costs and also improve competitiveness. The company is also weighing listing its car charging and energy businesses, in addition to existing IPO plans for its battery division. It also adds that nothing has been decided yet and will probably take up to 2 years before the new companies are established and ready for the stock market. And finally, South Korea's famous show Squid Game has officially become Netflix's biggest original series launch. The 9-part thriller has become a worldwide sensation for Netflix since its launch less than a month ago. The show's popularity has resulted in SK Broadband suing Netflix to pay for costs from increased network traffic and maintenance work due to a surge of viewers. And that's a look at our corporate headlines. Well, let's now take a short break, still coming up on the show. Signs of an economic rebound in South Africa as manufacturing takes up. And telcos in Uganda drop connection charges in a push to drive internet penetration.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back. Now, South Africa's manufacturing production is showing signs of a rebound. That's after COVID lockdowns caused massive supply disruptions. Factory activity was also negatively impacted. The sector was dealt a further blow after rioting in some provinces caused millions of dollars in product losses and damages to property. But latest data released shows that manufacturing production rose 1.8% year-on-year in August. Here's CGTN Sumitra Naidu with the details.
Inga Kubeka had a vision to create an African luxury brand that would boast handcrafting excellence. He started his business in 2017, fully aware of the challenges that lay ahead. But like every other business, he didn't see himself in the middle of a pandemic.
The last couple of months have been very challenging and difficult and hard for us. For instance, we had to close our store in Hyde Park Corner because we were very uncertain of what's going to happen. We were supposed to open up a shop at the V&A. We had to hold those plans. But that was also like a blessing in disguise for us because it opened our online and digital channel to actually boom.
An increase in online shopping has helped to keep hundreds of businesses afloat and limit job cuts. Overall manufacturing output climbed 7.6% in August.
The key sectors really did show a significant rebound from those effects. So the numbers are quite encouraging, and they are consistent with the Purchasing Managers Index, which showed a very strong recovery from July.
But global supply chain constraints may delay a full recovery, especially in the automotive sector.
What's really concerning in the auto sector is the supply chain disruptions emanating from the global shortage of semiconductors. We've already had some car makers locally indicating that they have suspended the production of some models.
The food and beverages sector showed the highest month-on-month growth amongst the subsectors, up almost 10% in August, but almost all of the subsectors declined in the last quarter.
What we are seeing in the first two quarters of this year, and particularly after last year in COVID, is that we see certain areas springing back, others also having still having issues, but we see job losses, and that is something that is quite concerning for us.
The slight rebound is encouraging, but it is also inconsistent. The manufacturing sector depends on a number of variables. Electricity is one of the most important, but also remains the biggest impediment right now. Eskom has started load shedding again, and power costs have risen. The impact thereof might be seen in the next set of numbers. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
And in Uganda, the country's communications regulator says that internet penetration amongst consumers is still quite low, and that's despite most businesses embracing e-commerce. But as CGTN's Hilary Ayesiga now reports, Ugandan mobile telecom operators are now moving to bridge that gap by connecting close to 22 million phone users at a cheaper cost.
Hilary Mukanye deals in phones. He says phones with no data connection attract more customers compared to smartphones.
Affordability is the main use according to me. Because as I say, some phones, the person comes looking for a phone of 30,000. And truth be told, 30,000 can't buy a good phone.
This trend is worrying the regulator and the mobile telecom operators.
But the biggest hurdle remains the device penetration, and therefore we need to invest, and we are investing in device subsidy so that more and more Ugandans can have access to mobile data services.
The phone operator says it will sell some smartphones at an affordable price, and payments will be in installments for 6 months. According to a recent report by the Uganda Communications Commission, the total number of connected smartphones or internet-enabled gadgets stood at 9.7 million, while basic phones were 22.4 million. On average, a smartphone on the Ugandan market costs about $33. That amount for some Ugandans is more than what they can afford. But as telecom operators push for easy access to smart devices, the biggest downside is high internet costs.
E-commerce is the way to go. People have to save time, but at the same time reduce costs of operations.
Ugandan lawmakers recently passed a bill introducing a 12% tax on internet data. Phone dealers want the taxes on phones and data reviewed.
The government can fix in their issues and policies concerning the taxes, so that when the taxes are low, the prices can be affordable in the long run.
But this may take some time as the country struggles to recover from the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. Hilary Ayesiga, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Meanwhile, the East African community is seeking to reboot its tourism sector after the ravages of the coronavirus pandemic from last year. Over 100 exhibitors from the region and 3,000 international and domestic tourism players got together in Arusha, Tanzania, to develop plans to attract back tourists. CGTN's Daniel Kijo was there and brings us this report.
True to the name of the company she founded, Agatha Bernard is ferocious in her pursuit of taking her business to international levels. That's why she came to the region's biggest tourism hunting ground, the East African Regional Tourism Expo. Her Afro Lioness Adventures is an all-women, female-owned tour company that has been in operation for 3 years. After toiling for 2 years to build it, last year, COVID-19 threatened to take it all away. She came to the expo to collaborate with others in the sector to make sure the losses she made in 2020 don't happen again.
I've get to meet so many people, and the good part is everybody who comes into our banda is like very excited, like only females, like, so they're becoming so surprised and inspired, and they are all willing to support us in one way or another.
Tanzania becomes the first East African country to host the expo. The event was introduced by the East African Community Ministers responsible for tourism and is done on a rotational basis. Burundi will be the next host in 2022.
We passed a strategic plan to promote tourism together through the East Africa Tourism Common Market Strategy.
East Africa Community reports reveal that the region lost close to 70% of international tourist arrivals in 2020, coupled with massive losses in tourism earnings and tourist-related jobs. Global vaccine rollouts have given players in the tourism sector hope. According to the latest edition of the UNWTO World Tourism Barometer, about 51 million tourists crossed international borders in July of 2021, down 67% from the same month in 2019, but the strongest results since April 2020.
From local and international tour companies, food and beverage brands, government agencies, and more, this event aims to promote East Africa tourism to the world. Now, this launch aims to take the region to new heights as it explores a whole new world of touristic opportunities.
The tourism sector is one of the most important areas of cooperation for the East African community, contributing to the economies of partner states in terms of GDP about 10%, export earnings 17%, and jobs about 7%. The EAC Secretary General says its multiplier effect and linkages with other sectors are undeniable.
Almost we have lost 92% in terms of revenues that are generated through tourism. And therefore, it calls upon all of us to work together with all the stakeholders, the private sector, and indeed the governments, to ensure that we market East Africa as a common destination for tourism.
As the expo wraps up with a plan to reconvene next year, participants were given a chance to explore Tanzania's tourist attractions like the Serengeti National Park and Ngorongoro Crater. It's hoped that the excursions will allow service providers and policymakers to create awareness of tourism investment opportunities for East Africa amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Arusha.
You're watching Global Business Africa. Let's take a short break now, but still coming up on the show. China pledges $230 million to set up a fund to help developing nations with biodiversity conservation efforts. And the International Monetary Fund trims its 2021 global growth forecast to 5.9%.
It's just taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
And now here's a quick recap of other headlines this hour. The UN Human Rights Office has called for a prompt, thorough, impartial and independent investigation into the use of force by Libyan authorities against migrants and asylum seekers. The announcement comes after armed forces in Tripoli conducted a series of mass arrests last week. The UN office says more than 5,000 people have been sent to overcrowded detention centers. And a move by Paris to enforce stricter visa conditions for Algerian, Tunisian and Moroccan nationals continues to threaten relations between France and its former colonies. Now, Algeria has also recalled its ambassador from Paris, while Mali summoned the French ambassador to Bamako over separate comments made by French President Emmanuel Macron. And a Chinese-owned mining firm has constructed a modern laboratory for studying malaria parasites in the southeast of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Malaria is a leading cause of death in the Central African nation, and the lab aims to use its research to help to reduce the high prevalence of the disease in the region. And that's a recap of other headlines this hour. Well, let's now get you some international news. More than 100 nations have joined a call to action to better protect life on Earth and to push for a sustainable future. The Kunming Declaration was adopted in southwest China's Yunnan province, where the United Nations Biodiversity Conference is currently underway. It includes commitments to help fund conservation in developing nations. The COP15 meeting aims to draw a blueprint for environmental goals over the next decade. Now, world leaders have called for better awareness, broad consensus and concrete action to preserve biodiversity. The Kunming gathering prepares the ground for the key COP26 climate summit in Glasgow at the end of this month. Meanwhile, China has pledged some $230 million to set up a fund to help developing nations with biodiversity conservation efforts. Chinese President Xi Jinping made the announcement at the ongoing UN COP15 summit in Kunming. CGTN's Yang Jinghao finds out how nations could benefit from this fund.
And definitely we are hoping that Bangladesh will also benefit from this fund. And especially not only Bangladesh, but the climate vulnerable countries, the developing countries, the least developed countries also, where there is a huge resource crunch. And due to this process of globalization, we all know that some countries are being marginalized. They are cut off from the mainstream of the world economy. So they also have to be helped.
Some of the biggest rainforests and most important ecological areas are in developing countries, so they really do need that assistance. Of course, being somebody in conservation, I would love to have seen that figure to be bigger. We always want more money, but I think it's, any new money for biodiversity conservation is very, very welcome.
I think it's possible that other countries and perhaps also non-country actors, like perhaps businesses or philanthropic organizations, could perhaps also contribute to this fund. I see that's possible. I think the Asian Investment and Infrastructure Bank provides a good example where China has taken the lead to develop a new financial institution where other countries became members and jointly managed. Probably the best way to spend this money is to focus it on developing countries and especially on efforts where those countries want to protect biodiversity, and to support them, for example, in identifying what are the most valuable areas to protect and conserve, to develop their capacities there, so to train people there and to provide them with the tools that are needed to do this effectively.
Meanwhile, Egypt's environment minister has officially handed over the chairmanship of the UN Conference on Biodiversity to her Chinese counterpart during an online video conference ceremony. During the virtual event, the Egyptian minister talked about Egypt's role during COP14 and the cooperation with China to prepare for COP15. Here's Adele El Marhoui with more.
On Monday, the Egyptian Environment Minister officially hosted an online meeting with China's Minister of Ecology and Environment to hand over the chairmanship of the Conference on Biodiversity COP15. Egypt briefed China about the achievements made during Cairo's leadership to CBD COP14.
It's been a long and a fruitful journey since Egypt took the chairmanship of the 14th Biodiversity Conference. I'm happy to be handing over the chairmanship of the conference to our brotherly nation, the People's Republic of China. We wish them a successful and fruitful leadership and to continue making progress over the efforts we worked on during the past 3 years.
Biodiversity includes all plants, animals, and microorganisms that exist in all ecosystems. The interaction of this creates goods and services, which means that our meals are products of biodiversity. It is the foundation of life. Egypt made many achievements during its chairmanship, and because of the pandemic, we realized that viruses that come from animals are dangerous, and that made us realize that our relationship with nature must be regulated.
The handover from Cairo to Beijing included a series of discussions about the global environmental challenges that lie ahead.
As the current chair of the Biodiversity Conference, China has many challenges in continuing the global negotiations for an environmental roadmap and elevating aspirations. We encourage China's move and announcement to decrease emissions, which is a vital issue affecting climate change. We welcome and value China's moves. I look forward to seeing China build up what we have reached to tie climate change issues with biodiversity.
Egypt was the first African country to chair the Conference on Biodiversity since its establishment in 1992. The chairmanship is usually a 2-year term, yet due to the COVID-19 pandemic, Egypt's chairmanship was extended by an additional year. Handing over the chairmanship of the UN Biodiversity Conference to China, Egypt has provided a full file of the progress Cairo achieved in the past 3 years, hoping that Beijing can build upon it and reach bigger goals for the next period. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Meanwhile, the International Monetary Fund has trimmed its 2021 global growth forecast to 5.9%. In its World Economic Outlook report, the IMF also left the 2022 forecast unchanged at just under 5%. At the same time, the IMF's executive board has decided to retain managing director Kristalina Georgieva, despite allegations of data manipulation during her stint at the World Bank. She has been taking a high-profile role in the IMF annual meetings this week. Here's CGTN's Caroline Malone reporting from Washington.
Supply-side shortages caused in part by a build-up of container ships at ports around the world are one of the unusual aspects of the pandemic global recovery, according to the International Monetary Fund. The IMF published its World Economic Outlook on Tuesday, highlighting global inequities due in part to access to COVID-19 vaccines. It detailed how supply issues continue to create uncertainty.
What we're seeing is supply-demand mismatches that have lasted a long time because the pandemic has also lasted a long time. So while we've seen a rebound in demand, supply hasn't been able to rebound as fast, and that combination has led to high levels of inflation. We've seen that in commodity prices, but we're also seeing that in supply chain breakdowns.
There's concern over an increase in energy prices affecting consumers, and inflation is flagged as one of the risks in the global report, with prices up substantially in some countries, including the United States. While meetings continue, the executive board of the IMF has expressed full confidence in managing director Kristalina Georgieva after a report that she manipulated data to appease China while at the World Bank. The IMF chief economist was asked about it at a news conference and said the IMF takes its data integrity seriously.
And as always, with any institution, including the IMF, we are constantly working to ensure the highest standards for our data and for our research and our analytical work. And as a part of that, we have ongoing reviews all the time, and we will continue to do so.
US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen spoke with Georgieva on Monday and said the World Bank investigation raised legitimate questions and concerns, even though there's no basis for a change of leadership. So the IMF's managing director, Georgieva, keeps her leadership position, creating some stability for the institution. But the global pandemic continues to create uncertainty. The IMF is warning central banks to keep stimulus measures and to act quickly if inflation continues to rise. Caroline Malone, CGTN, Washington.
Meanwhile, in its latest report, the International Monetary Fund says that China has the resources to handle any fallout from China's Evergrande Group's indebtedness. Now, Evergrande's over $300 billion in liabilities has raised investors' concerns and also triggered market contagion fears. The multilateral organization adds that China has the fiscal capacity and the legal and institutional tools. But it has also called for greater attention to communication and the need for next steps as financial stress risks are still lingering. Meanwhile, trade ministers from the G20 nations have reached consensus on several fronts during this year's virtual meeting in Sorrento, Italy. Participants at this year's meeting have agreed that consensus is essential on multiple fronts, such as safeguarding the multilateral trading system, as well as fighting the coronavirus pandemic and fostering trade and creating a better overall environment. Our reporter Wang Hui has the details.
This year's G20 Trade Ministers meeting is a curtain raiser of sorts for the upcoming G20 summit in Rome at the end of this month. It also is an important multilateral meeting before the 12th ministerial meeting of the World Trade Organization in Switzerland next month. According to data provided by the China's Ministry of Commerce, the GDP, trade volume, and inbound investment of the G20 members account for 86%, 77%, and 66% of the world total. Besides approving the G20 Trade Ministers meeting statement, the meeting has also sent out positive signals about safeguarding the multilateral trading system.
All parties have reiterated that we should strengthen the multilateral trading system surrounding the WTO, with the rules as basis. We have also agreed that we should strengthen WTO functions like making rules and regulations, and facilitate the normal operation of the WTO dispute settlement mechanism and negotiation function.
Chen says all parties have agreed that common efforts are necessary to combat the pandemic. The ministers have committed they will implement the decisions taken by the group to deal with the pandemic and foster global trade and investment.
All parties reiterate that all urgent trading measures to resolve the pandemic must be targeted, moderate, transparent, and temporary. The measures can't cause unnecessary trading obstacles or disrupt the global supply chain. The ministers have also emphasized that they will adopt a constructive approach to facilitate trade, protect intellectual property, and for production and distribution of COVID-19 vaccines.
Chen says all parties will strengthen the coordination of trade and environment policies, including the reaching of an agreement on fishing subsidies at the upcoming ministerial meeting of the WTO to protect maritime resources. Member countries will also deepen pragmatic cooperation for the development of small and micro enterprises, facilitate trade in services, and boost international investment. Wang Hui, CGTN, Beijing.
And China's General Administration of Customs says the country's foreign trade volume in goods has seen stable growth in the first 3 quarters of this year while containing the COVID-19 pandemic. CGTN's San Tianyuan reporting.
China's foreign trade volume has totaled 28 trillion yuan, or about $4.3 trillion in the first 9 months of this year. That's nearly up 23% compared to the same period a year ago.
China's economy has been resilient and continues to recover. It has maintained a fast and stable growth in foreign trade.
ASEAN remains China's largest trading partner, with bilateral trade reaching 4 trillion yuan. The total value has been expanding each quarter. However, growth rates have slowed down from 29% in the first quarter to 15% in the third.
The pandemic has put the world and its economic recovery on a roller coaster ride. China's foreign trade is also facing uncertainties and unstable factors in a complex and harsh environment outside the country.
China says strong demand at home has given steady support to the country's foreign trade. Optimism over China's economy is expected in the long term despite the pandemic. Looking forward, lower growth in the fourth quarter is expected, but it's unlikely to change the overall momentum of the steady growth in foreign trade this year. Sun Tianyuan, CGTN, Beijing.
Now, though the 4th China International Import Expo is still some 20 days away, the first shipment of sea freight, mostly machinery, for this year's exhibition has just reached Shanghai. Here's CGTN's Zhang Shixuan with more.
The 20,000 TEU container ship arrived at the second phase of Shanghai's Yangshan Deepwater Port last night, and one of the containers aboard was from the German light helicopter maker RS Helicopter GmbH, a first-time participant in the Import Expo.
Despite the global shipping congestion caused by the COVID-19 outbreak, China's COSCO Shipping managed to make the journey from Hamburg, Germany to Shanghai in just some 20 days, thanks to special support from both the shipping giant and the immigration inspection station.
We just got the connection from them at the middle of September. I just connected my colleagues in Germany. This is not the shortest, but the most fitable for the CRI exhibits from the Germany to Shanghai, because we can wholly control all the ports and when the vessel arrive China.
Zhou says that with the support of the government, the unloading time at the port has been shortened by hours.
We got in touch with the shipping company to understand the details of the ship. At the same time, we worked with the dock operator to set up a special channel for the import of CRI exhibits, so as to shorten the waiting time. And before the arrival of the vessel, we used our single-window procedures to finish the pre-check in advance, so as to ensure the ship could start unloading cargo as soon as it arrived.
Even before the ship left Germany, Shanghai's Yangshan port was getting ready for it.
We knew that the exhibit was about to depart from Hamburg on September 10th. Since then, our operations department has taken a series of measures to prepare, from organizing drivers to the planning of the delivery route and information tracing of the trip.
Luo says that every year the port begins preparing for delivery of import-export cargo as early as August. And it turns out that it's not only the growing number of exhibitors which benefit from the special service from local shipping providers. It's developing more business for the shipping companies themselves.
We have the exhibitors that cooperate, they changed into our customers. They not only import the exhibition goods, but also the general trading goods. So we have many new exhibitors every year, and we try to develop them to be our customers.
Zhou says that last year the Import Expo brought her dozens of new customers. Latest data from the General Administration of Customs show that China's foreign trade in goods in the first 3 quarters of 2021 totaled more than 28 trillion yuan, up almost 23% year-on-year. Good news and good business for everyone involved. Zhang Shixuan, ICS for CGTN, Shanghai.
On that note, let's take a look at commodity markets today. Oil prices dropping. That's after a mixed finish in the previous session. Of course, investors are worried that soaring coal and natural gas prices in China, India and Europe will stoke inflation and slow global growth, hence reducing oil's demand going forward. Meanwhile, gold prices holding steady today on the back of a softer dollar as investors await U.S. inflation data to gauge the U.S. Fed's path on normalizing policy. And a quick look at some soft commodities. Cocoa futures hitting 2-week lows today after Europe's third quarter grind figures from processors, which is a measure of demand, came in lower than expected. On that note, let's take a short break, but still coming up. Egypt's first smartphone maker to assemble handsets for the rest of the continent.
Images may appear to be identical,
but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
The greatest journeys. The greatest sights. The greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
And let's go to Egypt now. The country's first smartphone maker is planning to assemble handsets for other companies as it seeks to become the main contract builder of electronics bound for the rest of Africa. Now, the plan comes as Egypt, one of the continent's 3 largest economies, looks to boost trade with the rest of sub-Saharan Africa. CGTN's Yasser Hakim with the details.
Since 2017, Egyptian headquartered Seco Technology has been producing its own Nile X brand of mobile and tablets. Production has been steadily increasing and is expected to exceed 2 million units in 2022, up from 1.5 million in 2021. Exports have targeted several African and Arab Gulf countries, but it's the local market that has mostly embraced its brand.
It's a good mobile with a strong screen and a powerful software. Sales are good, especially that the price is competitive against the international brands.
Seco Industries company chairman Mohammed Salim says the Egyptian company is now expanding its business by partnering with Chinese and Indian companies.
Since now 2 years, we have been working closely with our Chinese and Indian companies to establish manufacturing of smartphones and feature phones in Egypt for the Egyptian market and the African market. So we are now in the phase of implementing our cooperation between the Chinese companies. For the first year, we are expecting a total production over 2 million phones per year.
Seco Electronics is set to co-manufacture these products. Local materials will constitute around 45 to 48% of the components, depending on the device and models. Selim believes the international brands will benefit from manufacturing in Egypt.
For the local market, they are getting ahead of the market because of the availability of the material or the products on time, having a better after sales and a local knowledge of their products, and also having big privileges when they are exporting. It is easing for the Egyptian products to enter the African markets without customs. That's what's called nowadays the COMESA for the East and Central African markets, which will expand very soon to the whole continent by applying the AFECTA, which is the Continental Free Trade Agreement. Also, we are exporting to Europe using the Euro 1 agreement.
The Cairo-based technological company is also planning to tap in its infrastructure to build other devices in the near future, such as electronics accessories, TVs, and satellite set-up boxes. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
And let's head over to the Democratic Republic of Congo, where a factory situated outside the Virunga National Park is making headwinds as it ventures into chocolate making in the jungles of eastern Congo. Now, riddled by the threats from armed rebel groups, the business has opted to offer viable employment solutions to the community.
The origin of the word chocolate refers to a bitter drink brewed from cocoa beans. For Roger Muhindo, venturing into the manufacture of chocolate has been a bittersweet journey.
The big challenge, first of all, was learning the trade, what chocolate is, how to make chocolate, and then getting good at it.
Situated in the Beni region, the factory has grappled with various challenges owing to threats from armed groups and lack of infrastructure.
Thieves come after the farmers, and the farmers are stressed. They are also our soldiers who guard us. As soon as the farmers leave the field, they are soldiers who steal the produce and resell it.
In less than a year, more than 200 civilians have been killed within a 20-kilometer radius of the chocolate factory. Since 2019, the Islamic State group has claimed responsibility for some of the attacks by the ADF. Despite the challenges, the Virunga National Park manages to keep the chocolate factory running.
On déploie des petites unités partout.
We deploy small units everywhere to protect those who are in the fields. It makes our job relatively hard. This is because people leave the big settlements and head to the fields. Once they cross paths with the enemy opts to eliminate them.
By creating jobs, the enterprise also hopes to provide an alternative to joining one of the region's many armed groups. Robert Nagela, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
And before we leave you today, a quick look at Africa's currencies. South Africa's rand rising 0.4%, the most amongst unit in Europe, the Middle East and Africa, as we see investors begin pricing in a possible interest rate hike next month. Meanwhile, Nigeria's naira continuing to hover around 413, 440 naira per dollar at the official market, even as we see external reserves increasing by about $620 million yesterday. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.